You cannot overstate the importance of Texas Tech winning against Oregon for the Big 12.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you all so much, especially my everydayers, for helping make that the case. Early impressions of Alex Golesh down at Auburn. We'll talk about that on today's show. Is it going to be a good cycle for Colorado in the portal? We shall find out also on today's show. But I want to start with Texas Tech. And I think their matchup with Oregon in the Orange Bowl is truly excellent. Both teams very balanced, very deep. They've both had outstanding seasons. They're both 12-1. Of course, Texas Tech, a conference champion. Oregon is not. But I think Texas Tech leans a little bit more towards their defense. Oregon maybe leans a little bit more towards their offense. That's the way it looked against James Madison. I think that was overblown by a scotch. But this is the tightest point spread, according to our friends at FanDuel, of any of the quarterfinal playoff games. And there's a reason for that. It should be an outstanding football game. But the importance for Texas Tech is unbelievably real. Not just for them. I'll talk about that angle of it for the Red Raiders program, but for the Big 12 writ large, which just had a team, I believe, unfairly left out of the college football playoff. I know that Miami won. I know. It's crazy that I'm going to still have this take after Miami went on the road against the almighty SEC and knocked off Texas A&M. It was an ugly game, but last I checked, all you got to do is score more points than the other team. It's crazy I'm still saying this, right? Well, guess what? BYU should have been in the playoff over Miami. My subjective opinion of who the best teams are is one thing. Who I believe should make the playoff, which should be based on merit so that the results during the season matter, so that we maintain urgency on the regular season. That's the conversation that I have with regards to playoff bids. So, yeah, I think BYU should have been in, but they weren't. Why? Because of the perception of the Big 12. The perception of the Big 12 in the eyes of the college football playoff world is that it is a second-class conference, that it's closer to the ACC than the Big Ten or the SEC, and that it's so far away it should be treated with absolute disrespect. Last year, the ACC got an 11-2 team into the college football playoff in SMU. They got housed in the first round. Maybe that's why BYU got left out, because they lost twice in convincing fashion to Texas Tech. Maybe that's the reason. But whatever the causes of the situation are, I think we can all agree the Big 12 doesn't get the respect that many feel it deserves, myself included, in many instances. So for Texas Tech to be going out there against a one-loss Big Ten team whose only defeat was to the number one team in the country and the conference champions, who are favored by about a touchdown against Alabama, which is wild, but that's the world that we live in. If Texas Tech goes out and wins that game, the statement made for the Big 12 is unbelievably real, and it'd be massive going forward. And if they lose, I think the ramifications for the Big 12 would be worse than the ramifications for Texas Tech. The Red Raiders have cruised on through the Big 12 conference this year. I mean, the conference championship game, won by double digits. They won every game that they actually won by 20 or more points. When Behren Morton starts, they haven't lost a college football game. They have been as dominant and complete of a football team as we've seen. That includes the nearly undefeated TCU Horned Frogs, who went to the national championship game. This Texas Tech team is better than that group. They're a much more complete football team. TCU's offense was better, for sure. But holistically, I would take this Texas Tech team. So you've got the best team that the Big 12 Conference has churned out into the playoffs since Texas and Oklahoma left the league, going up against one of the premier brands in the sport, one of the best teams in the Big Ten, who nobody was questioning whether they should be in the playoff, and has got NFL talent on both sides of the ball. If Texas Tech goes out and win that game, it has to give the Big 12 more respect. It has to. Because you have to look at them, at the very least the Red Raiders, but I think the rest of the conference as well. You have to look at them and say, man, the champion of the Big 12 just, let's say they win the game by 10, 13 points. You know, the way Indiana did. And then we go back after the fact, or at least many people do, and say, oh, so they really handled them, even if it was competitive with 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. If Texas Tech goes out there and has a performance like that, what does that do for the credibility of the Big 12? I think it has to do something. I think a loss is far more punitive. Because they were so dominant, because they've looked so good, because they've invested so much. If the conference champion can't beat a non-conference champion of the Big Ten or the SEC, I think even if it's a competitive football game, eventually, this is a very common thing in college football. A result happens, and we've watched the game, and we know all the details and how things came to be, and over time, the only thing that we remember is the result. So 6 months from now, when folks are putting together preseason power ratings or preseason AP rankings, are they going to remember that Texas Tech was competitive until the 3-minute mark and then Oregon scored 10 points to win the game by 13? Or are they going to remember that Oregon won the game by 13? Just in that particular hypothetical. So I think that Texas Tech is carrying a lot of water for the rest of the Big 12. They're trying to make a statement. They have not won a playoff game. And look, TCU beat Michigan. Beat the Big Ten champion way back when, and we're still in this position where we're talking about the credibility of the Big 12 compared to the other conferences. Texas Tech, for the sake of the Big 12, has to win that game. Now, from the Texas Tech angle, they have, of course, over the last 18 months to 2 years, made a massive financial commitment, and I commend them and Cody Campbell for doing so, because that's what it takes. You either care. I think there are places that care. I almost finished that sentence, and it sounded really insensitive, out of touch to some parts of the country, because I almost said you either care or you don't. I think there are places that care, Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, but don't have the physical ability, and that's a separate conversation. But if you do care and you have the ability and then you don't do it, then we've got a problem. You actually don't care in that scenario. So Texas Tech decided we care, we see an opportunity, we're going to go for it, and here they are. It would not be a failure, in my view, if Texas Tech lost this game to Oregon. When you go into these coin flip sort of games, man, that's like saying Oregon's season last year was a failure. It wasn't. The ending was incredibly disappointing. To get beat like that against Ohio State, a team you'd beaten earlier in the year, incredibly disappointing, frustrating, annoying. All of those things were felt in Eugene. You can't look at a 13-0 Big Ten championship season and call it a failure. If Texas Tech loses this game to a really good, really talented, really motivated Oregon team because of what happened to them last year, who's got more experience in the playoff than anybody on the Texas Tech roster or anybody on the Texas Tech coaching staff, I wouldn't turn around and say, oh, it was a failure. Wasn't worth the money. I'm not saying that about Texas A&M. I certainly won't say that about Texas Tech. So I think their game is more important for the Big 12 Conference than it is for Texas Tech football. If you disagree, though, let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. That is not to say that I think Texas Tech fans should just be happy-go-lucky. Oh, gosh darn, it was just great to beat. Nope, not telling you not to be disappointed if you lose the game. You absolutely should. You can be mad at a bad call that might have led to it or the way the team played. That is all completely fair. I just think that for Texas Tech, their long-term outlook is stronger than the Big 12 Conference as a whole. And that Texas Tech could do the Big 12 a favor by beating Oregon. If you disagree with anything I said, or if you agree, let me know in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, however you want to get in touch. Let's check in on Auburn, shall we? First, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. And guess what? Did you know that FanDuel has the college football playoff lines? Yes, indeed they do. If you really believe Indiana is going to trounce Alabama, hey, you can put your money where your mouth is and go lay the points with the Indiana Hoosiers against Alabama. What a world to live in. If you think Oregon is rolling against Texas Tech or vice versa, that game is almost a pick'em. Line has never been greater than 2.5 in either direction. All the information you could want, all the bets that you could possibly need, FanDuel has you covered. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. It's the early days of the Alex Golesh era in Auburn. So we have Zac Blackerby of Locked On Auburn, who I think is the most knowledgeable Auburn podcaster out there. Maybe I'm biased. Maybe I have to say that.
Biased.
Yeah, maybe I have to say that because he's my boss and he made me, and he said that I'd be
It is the
fired if I
largest
didn't.
Auburn podcast, for what that's worth.
Yeah, for what that is indeed worth. So early days of the new tenure there in Auburn. Good impression so far?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a shock to the system. I think it might be too early to tell how great that could be. But definitely is very different than Hugh Freeze, which I think is good. But until this portal window happens, like, we can't really tell what the magnitude of it is, right? Like a few days after Alex Golesh gets hired, we hear, okay, he's going to have $30 million on top of rev share for NIL to build out the roster, which should mean you're competitive, right? Especially when you look at what he did at South Florida with scheme and all of that. I like what he's able to do with that. So then the question is, okay, he's taking over a roster, Spencer, that was vastly overpaid. I called it Auburn paying the suck tax for the last few years. We sucked, so we had to pay players more to stay.
Oh, no.
And so you've got all these guys that have entered the portal, and it looks terrible. But all the reports and the folks I'm talking to is like, the more I learn and the more I dig, the more I realize how awful these contracts were for Auburn, how great they were for the player. And you can't win sustainably with that. And so you're seeing a lot of guys leave the portal, which was expected to some extent. There have been some names that have surprised me a little bit. And of course, this is all reports. They're not officially in, of course, and they could come back and negotiations could continue. But that's kind of been the first few weeks of the Alex Golesh era. Is sure, signing day happened really quick and they had some good flips there, but the portal is going to be the first major thing he's measured by.
Would you describe the mood when he got hired closer to flat out excitement or anxious anticipation of, are we going to have another Hugh Freeze, or are we finally going to get the level of football that we haven't had since before COVID, really, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, 2019 was kind of the last okay year. It's Bo Nix's freshman year. They beat Bama that year, and that was kind of the last solid year for Auburn football. Not great, but solid. So, I mean, I guess to answer that question, we've got to go back and look at the context. So this happened the morning after Auburn lost to Alabama in the Iron Bowl, and what was another close, kind of heartbreaking loss. Auburn claws back to get into it. They had a real shot. Cam Coleman fumbles at the end of the game. And then it's like, okay, I think a lot of people went to bed that night thinking Auburn was going to hire DJ Durkin to be the next head coach, to the point where late in the night, news broke, there's going to be a players meeting where they're going to be told who the next head coach is at 10 a.m. And it's like, 10 a.m.? Oh, so whoever's the head coach is already there, right? They can't be coaching a game right now when this news comes out.
Probably not.
It's like, oh, they live here already. They're already in the building. And so I think everybody thought it was DJ Durkin. I think Auburn AD John Cohen thought it was DJ Durkin. And then I think, my personal opinion here, I think he saw the response to that. Maybe it was people like me live reacting to the Iron Bowl, pitching a fit that DJ Durkin was going to be Auburn's next head coach. And at 1 a.m., he calls Alex Golesh, and Alex Golesh doesn't think about it. He said yes, signs the contract. They plan to, fly up from Tampa to Auburn that morning. And so to answer your question, when it was Golesh, I think there was general excitement that it wasn't DJ Durkin. And, and you also got to think, okay, the 3 weeks prior to that, we all thought it was John Sumrall. And while the fan base was split on John Sumrall, most people were like, yeah, this makes sense. Coached at Troy and State, knows the state of Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama native, did good things at Tulane, not against Ole Miss this past week, but goodness gracious. But still, I think a lot of the fan base kind of wanted him. And then you lose him to Florida because of the Lane Kiffin stuff. And then we thought it was DJ Durkin. So I think a lot of people were excited that it wasn't DJ Durkin. I think the average Auburn fan wasn't familiar with who Alex Golesh was.
Probably. I imagine the Auburn fans are not super dialed into South Florida football.
I feel like context was needed to actually.
No, that's why we bring you on the show, to give
right.
that sort of context. And I think that's an unfortunate way to see it, even though it's perfectly logical. I think that's unfortunate if you're Alex Golesh, because Auburn fans shouldn't look at him and say, I'm so glad you're not DJ Durkin. Like, no, you should be glad he's Alex Golesh.
Yeah,
he just had a much more difficult job at South Florida than what he has at Auburn. But where I'd like for you to go next with this conversation,
sure.
What's his biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think the initial biggest challenge is to reverse a culture of losing for the last half decade. I mean, like you said, 2019 was kind of the last really, time Auburn was good. They were okay the COVID year.
Ago. 6 years ago.
They went 6-4, I think, the COVID year with Gus when they fired him. And man, I think reversing that losing culture is a big part of it. I mean, I think that's tied to a lot of these negotiations. So when we're recording this ahead of time because this is going out on later in the week with the holidays, but
Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas. Sunday morning, while we're, that morning, Ashton Daniels, backup quarterback, started a few games for Auburn last year. Actually, I think exceeded expectations. I think he's going to be a good quarterback for somebody. And then Kay and Lee, these guys enter the portal. Amidst all that, Alex Golesh posts on his Instagram story, and for context, he does not post. I don't think he's posted anything that wasn't a collab with Auburn football since he's been hired. But he posts on his Instagram story just a picture of a graphic by Admiral Grace Hopper. It says the most dangerous phrase in our language is, we've always done it this way. He's fighting a current that is going the wrong direction and has been going towards the direction of losing for the last 5-6 years. And so I think that's his biggest challenge.
The quarterback question is a big one at any school. I feel like it's elevated in its importance at Auburn because of what the last couple of years have been. What do you expect him to do?
Yeah, I think Byron Brown, his quarterback at USF, is Auburn's next starting quarterback.
Do you feel okay with that?
Yeah, one of 13 players ever in the history of this great game to throw for 3,000 and rush for 1,000 in a single season. Yeah, I don't care what level of college football you're at. I mean, this is a guy who commanded the second best offense in college football last year. Bring him. I mean, what did we just talk about? Reversing and fighting a culture of losing. What do? You bring in guys who know the culture that you want to administer. And so obviously there's going to be a lot of South Florida guys that are going to be tied to Auburn as soon as they enter the portal. There's been several that have already been reported and expected to enter the portal on January 2nd when it opens. As we record this, Byron Brown is not one of those guys. I expect him to be at some point. I don't really understand why he needs to do that. There's no leverage involved. But I do think there's going to be several guys like that do follow him to Auburn, and I think Auburn's next quarterback will be Byron Brown.
I feel okay about that from an Auburn standpoint. When I thought about the idea of him going with Golesh coming from South Florida, I thought of Devin Dampier, who transferred to Utah with his offensive coordinator from New Mexico and brought a whole different look to a tougher level of competition. There were some bumps and bruises along the way, no doubt. But overall, he was able to run effectively, he threw it well, and Utah had a resurgent season. I think that's what Alex Golesh is trying for here. Because if you bring him along, frankly, compared to if you had tried to have a quarterback battle between Ashton Daniels and anybody else in that room, I think bringing Byron Brown actually raises the expectation level for Auburn in 2026.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. And it's tricky to bring this up, but like, as we discussed this, the future of Deuce Knight has not been brought up. And so we'll see what happens there. But obviously Deuce Knight is a factor as well. The ideal situation for Auburn: transfer portal starting quarterback, which I think it should be Byron Brown, and you find a way to retain Deuce Knight, and he's the guy in 2027, no matter what.
I think that'd be a pretty good plan.
I do too.
Because I think you could have a certain floor of production offensively that with Auburn's schedule, it's kind of somewhere in between of being super favorable and being a ridiculous gauntlet. I think you should be able to win 7-8 games. And by that point, once Deuce Knight has had a chance to see how the system operates, build a relationship with the coaching staff, and sit and learn for a year, maybe even play in a couple of spots, he should be ready to go. And then you take that next step. Yeah, for sure. And, we'll see what happens with this young defensive core if they're able to keep them together. But there's elements of this that look like Auburn could really pop in 2027. So, does that align with Deuce Knight's year, his junior year? Yeah, it could. It could, if that's handled correctly. It's always an if, isn't it? It's always there's always the
an if. Yeah.
There's always the if this, if that. There's always that. But you know what? We'll end it on a positive note there today. I think that's what the fine folks in Auburn need more than anything. Zac Blackerby of Locked On Auburn. We're going to Boulder next. Is it the same story? Is it the same story with the Buffs? We shall find out. Will it be the same story for Colorado in the portal? To find out, we bring on Kevin Borba. He hosts Locked On Buffs and knows of such inner working. So, Kevin, in the early days of the transfer portal announcements, the portal has not officially opened as we record the show or by the time this segment airs. There have been more than a few Buffs players that have announced they're leaving. That's been pretty common. Omarion Miller, probably the most high profile of the bunch from where I'm standing. But do you expect there to be another massive backfill on this roster for Deion Sanders?
Yeah, the Buffs have been hit pretty hard by the portal. Omarion Miller, like you mentioned, is a top, I range from 10 to 20 wide receiver in college football next year. I think he's that good. I mean, he has a couple things to clean up, but losing him was huge. I do think receiver has always been a position that Colorado's been able to adjust at, but losing safety Tafik Bayard is probably the biggest loss of them all. He played like the last 4 weeks with a broken hand. He had a club on his hand. And the dude really showed he cared. So Colorado has a huge problem, and you're going to be seeing a lot of Colorado commitments in the portal because they only brought in, I think the number is 13 high school signees. And so they were one of the most veteran-heavy rosters in college football, believe it or not. They finished 3-9, so it didn't probably show. But they had a lot of guys leaving anyways. So I think my calculation, I have them – they're going to need around 50 transfers to come in and really – just to have a
50.
Yeah. And I'm not even joking, not exaggerating. Like they're going to have 50 portal guys probably, unless they bring in more recruits. 5-0, that is. Yeah. So they're going to have to figure out if they can identify talent and develop guys better than they did last year. Right. Because last year was sort of, they thought they had it under control. They were supposed to be building off a 9-4 season. And I think they took a major step back, and Deion Sanders has made a few coaching changes. So yeah, they need 50 transfer portal guys. There was over 4,000 entries last year. Can they find the right 50? I don't know.
Yeah, that's just such a big number. And
it is.
Look, I had Colorado pegged as a pullback team from the moment I was making my preseason predictions. I didn't think they'd pull all the way back to 3-9, but I don't think they handled the quarterback situation correctly. I am hoping it will just be Juju Lewis going forward, right? Like, is there a quarterback debate in Boulder? Because I think with the amount of time he did see this season and from what we saw from him, you make him the starter and you build a team around him. Because that's another angle of this transfer window for the Buffs is you now need to support your young quarterback, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely hit it on the head. Julian Lewis is the future of the program. They're building around him. He has already tweeted a handful of times that he's committed to Colorado, which on was it Thursday or Friday when they lost like 10 players in one day. People needed to see that, right? I think Colorado fans needed a little bit of like, oh, this guy still wants to be here. So yeah, you build around him. I do think they'll need a portal quarterback just because you're losing Caden Salter out of eligibility. And then I doubt Ryan Staub's going to want to hang around and be a backup again. So you're probably going to need to bring in one or two arms from, say, like a group of 5 school where they're basically a glorified grad assistant. But other than that, you have Julian Lewis. And like you said, you have to build around him. I think you saw what you had in him in those past or the last few games. And then you brought in Brendan Marion, his offense is very complementary to quarterback. So I think Julian Lewis, even though he's not really that much of a runner, I think he'll thrive in that offense. But yeah, Colorado, they have a lot to rebuild. They have a lot to sort of do this offseason. I think the quarterback situation is as clear as ever. Last year, there was some inter-program disagreement on how they should have handled the quarterback situation, and I think we saw how that weighed out. Julian Lewis's dad even tweeted something not too long ago that, like, we thought we were going to be – it was Juju's team, and then all of a sudden they brought in Caden, and it was just one of those things where I don't think Colorado ever had a clear idea of what they were doing at quarterback. And you know the saying, when you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. And by week 3, Colorado had 3 quarterbacks that they were trying to – work out. So I don't even know.
Does that mean they had -1 quarterbacks? Is that how?
I think that's how
it works.
Yeah,
1 equals 1, 2 equals 0, 3 equals -1. Is that?
I think that's the Pythagorean theorem. I think that's
yeah. I think that has to be how it works. So I don't believe that Deion Sanders has to win in 2026 or else he'll get fired from Colorado. I don't see that. Here's what I do wonder about, Kevin. As we get ready to approach portal season, and as you mentioned, you expect the Buffs to be very busy. This will be year 4 of punting, for all intents and purposes, on high school recruiting and saying, I'm building through the transfer portal. That's how I'm constructing my roster, the overwhelming majority of it. No. If it doesn't work, that has to change, right?
I thought I had to change this year, honestly. I thought there was a point in the season where probably after the Utah-Arizona loss where it's like, okay, we get it. Like, these portal guys are not working out. There was still time. Granted, it was late in the recruiting cycle. Like, signing day was last month, right, if I'm not mistaken. So they didn't have a lot of time, but I thought they could have at least tried a little harder. But I think that's what Brendan Marion brings into the table. Brendan Marion at Sac State was offering people left and right. He probably sends out thousands of offers per recruiting cycle. So I think by bringing him in, that at least shows me that Colorado's going to try a little harder to recruit. But yeah, if Deion Sanders really thinks the transfer portal method is the way to go, I think if Colorado's fine with that, they're just fine with sort of having erratic seasons, right? There's going to be seasons where it's like, hey, we went 9-3 and we almost contended for the Big 12 and that was exciting. And then there's going to be seasons like this. If that's what Colorado wants to sign up for, then fine. But I think Deion Sanders probably should go all in on recruiting in 2027. And I think, and people don't really understand this, but if you recruit people and they stick around, you could just fill in those holes with transfers. You don't have to be like, okay, we need a brand new roster. I know. Nobel Peace
telling
Prize
me that for the first time.
I'm learning this information for the first time right now.
Yes, yeah, 100%. So the conversation you and I had several times on this show last year was about the offensive line. Because they went out and added some pretty legit transfers on the offensive line. Do you feel like that group did well enough to justify primarily building that unit through the portal again?
No, but they did fine enough to where they're all multi-year investments. So I think Colorado's going to return 3 or 4 of them. So you're actually getting a core, right? You're going to have Jordan Seaton, you're going to have the right tackle, and you're going to have a couple other guys here and there. So they should have a good chunk of them back. They still didn't rank anywhere near the top of like sacks allowed. They were still in the 120s, if I'm not mistaken, but they were better. And I think Brendan Marion's offense will help them out, honestly. I think it'll play to every offensive lineman's strength, which is run blocking, right? Every offensive lineman wants to push forward and just run people over. They don't always love sort of backpedaling and keeping people in front of them. But I think building through the portal through the offensive line is just like building for it's like trying to build your roster, through the portal. It gets complicated, and it's kind of a crapshoot the entire time. But this year's group was fine enough. Would I want them to keep doing it? No. But they did bring in, of the 13 recruits, a couple of them were offensive linemen. So we'll see if those guys could develop into core players moving forward.
I love the Brendan Marion hire. I think that is one of the best coordinator hires, and I'm factoring in Jim Knowles at Tennessee.
Yeah.
I think Brennan Marion is probably one of the top 5 coordinator hires we'll have this cycle. They haven't all been made just yet. I think that Missouri pulling Michigan's offensive coordinator, I think that could be a pretty interesting fit as well. I like the Brennan Marion fit. I am a fan.
I have a hot take on it. I think it's the hire of the offseason.
Go for it. Oh!
Quite frankly, including
the hire of the offseason.
I think this hire could save the Deion Sanders tenure, quite frankly, because it was getting bleak at the end there. A lot of people calling for some hot seat jargon and chatter, and I don't think it should have gotten to that point, but I think Brennan Marion could really help people forget how bad Colorado was this year.
He's Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, with everything that you could possibly need on Colorado. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.